Good morning, friends. I'm delighted to be here with you today for your celebration of Earth Day and creation justice. My special gratitude to the young people who are blessing us with their contributions in today's worship. I want to start with a little bit of history. Earth Day was created in 1970. When it came into public awareness, all of the terrible things that were happening with polluting chemicals. We even had rivers that were so polluted they were catching on fire. Our national concern was widespread, and so Congress created the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure that people had access to clean air, water, and land. Unfortunately, those laws were not the end of the story. In 1989, James Hansen documented before a Senate hearing that climate change was real due to the burning of fossil fuels. In 2019, an environmental lawyer and activist, Gus Speth, wrote, "I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation." Friends, it is past time that we grounded our response to the environmental crisis and the need for environmental justice firmly and powerfully in all our religious communities. We may not know the science behind a transition to a sustainable energy economy, but my goodness, don't we know about spiritual transformation? We are in the business of spiritual transformation, and we have the resources to deal with the dimensions of this crisis. Perhaps one of our greatest resources are our scriptures from all traditions, many of which proclaim the beauty of the natural world. And you've heard wonderful phrases in the hymns today that remind us how beautiful this earth is. However, for me, our teaching this morning gets right to the heart of the matter. Do not lay up for yourselves treasure on earth, but lay up for yourselves treasure in heaven. For where your treasure is, there will your hearts be also. And so, I think we must ask ourselves a question this morning. Where are our hearts? If we look at the accumulation of treasure, we might conclude that our hearts are in our bank accounts. The United States, with only 4.25% of the population of the world, holds 29% of the world's wealth. If we dig a bit deeper, we learn that last year the top 5 fossil fuel companies reported a record-breaking $200 billion in profits based on the build-out and extraction of the Earth's resources. Alongside this accumulation of earthly treasure comes another reality. In 2022, the U.S. alone had an estimated $165 billion in climate-related damages, and 474 people lost their lives. Global damages last year were estimated at $313 billion, and I do not know how many people died. A person in the US consumes 11 times more carbon than someone living in Africa. Yet African people who have contributed the least to the problem are affected far more by climate change, with an estimated 2.6 million people displaced in 2021 due to climate-related disasters. Worldwide, that number was 23 million. Yet, fossil fuel industries and their funders continue to lobby and invest in this cycle of destruction. And so we must ask, where are our hearts this day? In her poem, Mary Oliver writes about the beauty of nature and how she finds solace and comfort among the trees. So profound is this experience, she writes, I would almost say they save me, and daily. She is not alone in finding solace in the natural world. In the book of Genesis, it is clear, in the beginning, God made the earth and called it good. Yes, thank you. Human beings are made of earth and in God's image. You read a little further, and we realize the earth was given into our keeping. It might sound funny, but what if the earth is not an earthly treasure, but a heavenly one? Something not simply to be consumed, but rather to be appreciated and respected for its heavenly qualities. How would we change if we thought about the earth differently? 2 years ago, I had the good fortune to travel to northern Minnesota, where the indigenous people of that land were seeking to protect their ancestral treaty lands from the construction of a tar sands pipeline known as Line 3. The resistance did not succeed, but we did learn and gain some heavenly treasures. We learned about Native culture and their beliefs. We built relationships and community. And we began to understand, or perhaps remember, how deeply connected our future is to the well-being of our indigenous siblings and the earth that we live upon. Especially powerful to me were the words of Elder Mary Lyons, who reminded us that her people had been living on this land we call home for 10,000 years. In that time, she said, her people had learned how to live in harmony with the earth. They tried to be careful and to respect Earth's gifts by not taking more than the earth could give, and to move on to a new place to give the earth a chance to rest. The reciprocity that she described was not simply transactional. It was about a heartfelt connection that the people had with the earth and with God. But perhaps even more powerful to me was her reminder that most of us came from somewhere else. She noted that we tell our stories of discovery, conquest of the frontier, bringing civilization, without ever really understanding that we are new characters in a much older story. And then she asked us a profound, yea, transforming question. How do we, newcomers to this land, how do we practice our faith? And so we are turned again by her question back to our scripture for this morning. Where your treasure is, there will your hearts be also. And where are our hearts today? Friends, our treasure is not in our bank accounts. I think you might already know that. The treasures we long for cannot be purchased by money. Acts of kindness, a sense of belonging, friendship, forgiveness for our wrongs, a sense of purpose. We find these treasures in the life and teachings of Jesus, with his ministry among the poor, in his struggle against injustice and oppression, with his sacrifice and generous forgiveness, in his unearned grace and never-ending love. These are heavenly treasures, and they can only be purchased, if you will, by our love and our devotion. That is why at Green Faith we wrote this vision statement in keeping with our collective core values of love, compassion, and justice. I will share it with you. We envision a world transformed in which humanity in all its diversity has developed a shared reverence for life on earth. Religious and spiritual communities everywhere generate a moral awakening to the sacredness of the earth and the dignity of all people. Together, we are building resilient, caring communities and economies that meet everyone's needs and protect the planet. The era of conquest, extraction, and exploitation has given way to cooperation and community. The good life. The good life is one of connectedness with each other and with all nature. It is a world of flourishing life that replaces despair with joy, scarcity with shared abundance, and privilege with justly distributed power. So I want to tell you another story. This one is about a work colleague named Baraka Ospina. Baraka lives in Tanzania, where the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, or EACOP, is being built. This pipeline will go through the Victoria Lake water basin and one of the largest nature preserves in southern Africa. And along its way, it is displacing 180,000 people. In 2018, the people were told they would be bought out of their homes and land, and they were encouraged to take a settlement. But most of them did not receive this settlement until 2022. And in that intervening 4 years, the price of land and housing went up, so that a farmer who agreed to receive $500 in 2018 could no longer afford to buy land or a house in 2022. Baraka is part of a contingent of people of faith who have organized to resist this pipeline. Their resistance brings them into contact with the police and the government. It is a very difficult and tricky situation, and Baraka is risking his life by resisting. But when you hear his story, you realize that he has little choice. Where will these people go? How will they support themselves? It's heartbreaking. Now, the funding for these projects comes from banks. And some of those banks are US banks, and some of them are even here in Charlotte. And so we find we have a very close connection to East African rural communities and our home, Charlotte. And we have a very close connection between our story and theirs. Because what is the message when wealthy companies and countries benefit while Baraka's community suffers? This is not an easy thing to think about. But I firmly believe that if we want to create a sustainable planet for future generations, for the children sitting in these pews, then we must be willing to look at situations that are difficult and make us uncomfortable. The impact of fossil fuel is too often measured only by the dollars that land in our bank account and the pockets of corporate investors. We are not measuring the cost to our health, our social fabric, or the earth. I invite us to open up our hearts to the challenges and the hard questions. It is worth mentioning, as Baraka's story implies, that these impacts do not affect all of us equally. It has been well documented that poor people, Black and brown people, women and children, Indigenous people, the elderly and the disabled are disproportionately affected by these kinds of problems and disasters. It is because many of these industries are located in greater proximity to their neighborhoods, and they do not have the resources or the ability to protect themselves or move elsewhere. This is what is known as environmental injustice and environmental racism, an idea that was actually born right here in North Carolina in Warren County in 1982, when Black and Indigenous people began protesting the disposal of toxic waste in their communities. The work of Green Faith is to rise together for the well-being of all people and the planet. We recognize the moral imperatives found in the teachings of Jesus to care for those who suffer and to speak the truth and to name a most difficult challenge of our time, that where we put our treasure and our hearts matters. And that is why, as Paula mentioned, tomorrow, faith and climate activists are meeting in Uptown Charlotte at 11 a.m. to vigil for the planet and to protest our continued investment in new fossil fuel infrastructure in advance of several bank shareholder meetings on Tuesday. The time for action is now. We have run out of time. It has been 53 years. I invite us to open our hearts to those who are struggling on the front lines of climate change, the poor, the youth, the climate migrants, the Indigenous, and even the earth. Let us listen to what is happening, and in listening, may we be transformed. We are people of faith. We are in the business of spiritual transformation. Together, all together, because it will take all of us. Let us support one another. Let us share wisdom and find the courage to make the changes we need to make. Today, I invite you to go outside and experience the life-saving grace of trees. And tomorrow, I hope to see you on the corner of Trade and Tryon in Uptown Charlotte. For where our treasure is, there will our hearts be also. Amen.